If I asked you how many calories is in this ground beef right now, how much would you think that there is? You might say that there's 200 or 300 calories just for this amount, but what if I told you that it's actually 600 calories? You see, ground beef is really good for cooking in bulk for things for meal prep, so you can lose weight and build muscle at the same time. But what if I told you that you're not using it to your fullest potential? So in today's video, I want to show you 3 ways how I use ground beef to lose weight in my favor rather than against me, and also how it stacks up to other foods, because there's a lot of other foods that you might think are good, but ground beef could actually be better for you for your fitness goals. And it all started off when I was in high school. So when I was in high school, I used to do a lot of sports early in my high school career. I used to do a lot of things for football, basketball, you name it, I would do all of it, or at least try to do most of it. And every time after practice, we would end up going to Chipotle to get food, and I would always end up getting burritos. And I would go to Chipotle and I would end up eating a bunch of food there, and over time I ended up gaining weight. And this felt really weird because for me doing cardio every single day, because I used to do a lot of basketball and football, I was very curious, why was I gaining weight at this time? Obviously, I noticed that I was eating more calories, but except I thought I could offset that by doing a bunch of cardio, which is not the case, fun fact for you. But as soon as I went home and started cooking at home for my own burritos, I thought to myself, wow, I'm losing all this weight again, and I haven't really changed anything. I'm still eating large portions of burritos, but what gives? And that was the main lesson that I learned from difference between eating out and eating home, is that you have a lot of control at your house once you eat at home. Regardless if you are a young adult or in your 50s, you are able to control what you have in your house more in terms of when you buy groceries and what you're doing. So that is a huge factor to play in. But just because that you're eating out does not mean that you have control of everything that you have. Let me explain. So let's say if you went to Chipotle and you decided to get beef, the beef barbacoa, and on that you might look at the menu and says, oh wow, it only has 150 calories. And on the surface that looks pretty good, but in reality you're not factoring in all the oils that they cook it in, the wrap that you're having it with, all the other things you add side by side, such as your sour cream and also your guac. Guac is amazing, by the way, don't bag on the guac. But on this, if you have all these different factors coming into play, you're not gonna know what is actually the result of your food. Of course, Chipotle or maybe another place will give you some nutritional facts, but in all honesty, you never know, because one chef could cook it with maybe like a tablespoon of butter, but another guy can literally mass bulk cook it up with, let's say, like a half a cup of butter. I'm being very extreme here, but except you get what I mean. It's not consistent every time. But as soon as I switched the table and then started to go home and then cook, I understood that I was able to consistently have a result that I wanted, which ended up helping me lose weight in the long term. So it was a major point to change from eating out to cooking from home. But even if you are cooking from home, that does not mean that you're ending up in a better spot than you are eating out. The only change is that you are actually in control of what you can have. And here's what I mean about that. Even after when I graduated high school, I started to focus a lot more on weight training and running. And even though that I was doing weight training and running, I was still confused on why I wasn't really losing weight, even though ground beef was my main source of protein and I had a lot more knowledge in nutrition at the time. So I was like, what gives? I stopped eating out. I'm not having all the oils that cause excess calories. I'm not having all this refined stuff, but I'm not seeing the scale change. So what's up with that? And what I noticed is that as I'm going throughout my time of cooking these meals, I started being a little more conscious of what I was pairing them up with. So what I ended up doing was that I took about 2 weeks throughout the time, every day, tracking not calories, but just the foods I was having with my meals. And I realized that when I was having ground beef and things such as like tacos or burritos or just on its own, I realized that I was having so much of high calorie foods. So for example, if I had something with like ground beef, I might also have it with like a ton of potatoes. Yes, those are filling, but except depending on how you make them, they could also be very caloric. So when I started noticing this as a trend, I was thinking to myself, what should I change in this? And I end up switching out those foods for things such as like vegetables, like broccoli, and then also switch to things like apples or bananas. And lo and behold, I actually started losing more weight. And why is this important? The reason why is just because that you are eating from home now, that only means that you can just visibly see what you're putting in your food. So even if you are cooking from home and if you're still having all natural foods, that does not mean that you're going to lose weight instantly. You still have to be conscious of what you're putting with your food at the same time. So it's good to be conscious when you're having things with your ground beef, because let's say if you have something that's overly refined and super processed, yes, of course, you are going to gain some weight on that case. But if you are more mindful in your eating and be a little more conscious about what you have, then of course that will be a silver bullet to actually start losing weight, which is really good. And if you want to take it to the next level for things that you mix in, such as like vegetables, you can also do this with sauces as well. Because if you do it with things like sauces, that is a huge thing that causes people to go over their caloric limit, which ends up causing them to gain weight. And I decided to switch over to sugar-free sauces, such as like G. Hugh's, because oh my gosh, G. Hugh, you are a savior. Thank you so much. Because a lot of the calories ended up going from, let's say, 60 per tablespoon to 5 per tablespoon. And let me get this straight, guys. You are not going to have just a tablespoon of sauce. And if you're slathering that up with your ground beef, let me tell you, that could be the difference between putting 60 calories on your ground beef to 600 calories. And if you don't believe me on this, just go to McDonald's and look at the calories on the sauces and you'll see how fast all that adds up in such a short time. You're basically getting more on the sauces than you are with the actual patty that you're buying. So that is a huge difference to keep in mind of. And even if you are doing the right thing now and you're not eating out and you're at home, and now that you're starting to understand a little more, okay, if I decide to cook from home and I am able to do this more often and I'm putting the right foods together, that is already a pretty good winning game plan for losing weight. But what if I told you that just the meat alone could affect your entire goals for everything that you're doing? Yes, that could be a huge factor. Because let's put it in this perspective. Let's say if you had a difference between 70-30 ground beef, which is really cheap, and you can possibly buy that in bulk anywhere, let's say like Walmart or Target. And then if you also decide to buy a 96.4 or 97.3, there are many types of different parts. It all means is just the fat percent inside the meat. And if you decide to go with the 70-30 instead, yes, it might be cheaper. And if you notice on the calories for the 70-30 beef, it is going to be way higher in calories and also less in protein. And why is that important? Because yes, you are getting a lot of calories, and people say that, oh, ground beef is great for protein, and that is true. But if you're having so many calories just to get that protein, dude, there are so many better ways to get it. You can get something as simple as like Greek yogurt, and it'll have way less calories for more protein compared to what you're seeing right now. But if I decide to switch it to something like 96.4, which is still, personally, I love this type of meat, or even if you want to go to 90-10, you will still be able to see a huge difference in the terms of calories and the protein you're getting for those calories to stay full without going over your caloric limit on that. And if you're also comparing something like salmon, you're going to have way less calories than most of other foods too. So that's a huge factor, especially when you're wanting to eat ground beef properly. And when I mean properly, I am just saying the most effective way to lose weight and to feel full, because this is what I've done, and I was able to lose a ton of weight on my own personally. So how does this compare to other animal-based foods such as like chicken or dairy or fish? Well, technically, a lot of people say that animal-based foods are better than plant-based foods in terms of getting your protein. And a lot of times that is correct, but there's one major caveat, is that you gotta be smart of where you're actually getting your protein from. Because if you look on this chart right here, depending on the ground beef that I mentioned, if you have 70-30, you could tell that the amount of calories that you're getting for that protein, especially if you're trying to lose weight, is way lower than something like chicken. But as soon as you start changing the fat percentage on that ground beef and then decide to go up, you will have a lot more room to actually eat a lot more and to get a lot of protein for that amount of calories. So it starts climbing up and up. But obviously, this is not the only thing that you could do with the meat. You could also just have less of the other types of, let's say, 70-30 or 80-20, and then mix it in with something even leaner like chicken. That is a decent mix. But except if you don't like those other foods, unless if you want to have something even plant-based like your tofu or beans as a supplementary source, or even as your main source if you're vegetarian, then yes, that's a big thing to consider, especially if you want to know the difference of what you're getting, because there's always trade-offs when you're wanting to know, okay, how many calories in this food for what I want. So one note that really helped me is that if I could have one food that hits my protein goal without going over my calories, would I eat this food? And if you start thinking of a lot of the foods, they would end up being on the higher part of this chart, which I would highly recommend look at the top of the chart, especially if you want to lose weight, because it is the easiest to feel full and to also just get the most protein to feel full in the first place, and you're not having too many calories. So that's definitely one step in the right direction, especially if you want to lose weight. So now you know that you can easily make ground beef a cheat code to basically start losing weight easily with these 3 principles. But you can also do this with other things like dessert as well. And for me, I was able to make low-calorie ice cream that was less than 300 calories for the whole pint. Yes, the whole pint. So if you guys like that, make sure that you guys check out this video right here to see all the details on how to do that, and I will see you guys over there in a second.